said, hello, I just started watching your show and thought maybe you could help me. We're thrilled that you're here with us. Welcome. She says, my daughter is 35. She has about 10 to 15 words that I can understand. She needs a wheelchair to get around. Lately, she has been biting the back of her hand and yelling a lot. I feel like she does this when she wants my attention or a new toy. How can I teach her how to get my attention and to wait when she is so limited? I'm grateful to any tips you have for me. I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Yes, this is, I find a pretty common thing with our adults because, you know, they never really learned how to use language or words to communicate their own needs. And so anyone who is not able to communicate their own needs verbally or non-verbally, you know, and using some form of language, non-verbal language also being a form of language. If you're not able to express yourself, the only other thing that you'll tend to do, and this is a very typical behavior, it's not just this spectrum, it would happen to you if you suddenly were you know, not in any way able to communicate with those around you. What you would do is you would throw a fit. You tantrum and become aggressive, and it's the only way to let others know that you're unhappy. It's the only way to let others know what was just requested is not okay with you. It's funny, it's one of those things that of course we do before we learn language as a baby, right? So if something is taken away, we'll cry and scream and so on. If something is, you know, if someone says you have to do something that you don't want to do, you'll cry and tantrum and so on. And so it's that same behavior here. And of course, it's very clever that you've identified that she does this when she wants your attention or when she wants a toy. So those are two functions called attention seeking, attention function, and the other one is tangible function, which means she's trying to get access to an object, a tangible object. So what you want to do, the rule is always to make the individual understand that this behavior is not working. So what she's trying to communicate is, let's say, I want a toy. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure she doesn't get a toy by doing that behavior, and instead she gets the toy by doing a better behavior. So that's the golden rule. Now, to define that a little bit better, let's say she starts biting her hand and screaming, yelling, and you know that this is because she's asking for a new toy. Well, before it gets to that point, if you can identify, and as a parent you probably can, if you can identify, oh, she's about to do this, and you can stop before she actually does this or gets to that level, just show her a picture, like a little icon or a picture of a series of toys. Let's say that would be your icon to use for asking for a toy. And all you really do is you will physically prompt her hand to touch the toy. It doesn't even have to be pointing, she could just touch it. And if you can do that, you're physically doing it for her at this point, and then you give her the toy, she will gradually over time get the concept that touching this picture or giving you this picture, which is another thing you can do, gets her the toy. Now, if you're late and you can't predict and she starts to tantrum and yell and scream and bite her hand, then you have to ignore it. You literally have to walk away. The minute she stops, and not the second she stops, but you literally want her to stop for a full minute or more. If she stops doing that, and then she's calm enough where you can take her hand, put it on the picture, or physically prompt her to give you the icon or the picture, then you can give her the toy. So what you're doing is you're ignoring it when she does the bad behavior, and or even preceding it, so trying to avoid the bad behavior. But if it happens, you're ignoring it, and instead you're physically prompting her to touch something or give you something that's a symbol for what she wants, and then you will give her that object. Now you do that, let's say, 30, 40 times or 50 times, she'll get the message. And and I know it sounds like a lot, but it isn't. It might even happen in 3 times. Definitely, I know those tantrums are scary, and I know the hand biting is very, very scary. But if you completely ignore it, that means if you can, leave the room. Okay, if it's safe to leave the room, she won't do it. If it is related to her trying to get your attention or trying to get your attention to get a toy, to let you know she wants something, if you walk away, it'll probably stop. I mean, you can set up a camera to make sure of that, but usually we don't do that sort of behavior in order to get attention if there's no one to give you attention. So that's a very important thing, and it is important to replace any this rule basically applies to any and all bad challenging behaviors. You ignore them or you block them, but in this case you would ignore it, and you would prompt her physically to actually go ahead and give you an icon, which is the easiest form of visual communication, and then she would get the object. Now, as this progresses, you can then produce a PEX book for her, so a series of icons, obviously, and you can go anywhere and buy. There's all forms of things. Let's say you have she has 10 to 15 words also, by the way, so you could teach her to say toy as one of her new labels. If she has 10 to 15 words, I'm pretty sure she can learn additional labels. But you don't have to. You could also produce an icon list for her. So that would be like a board. You'd put little sticks of Velcro on there, and then you can have these icons attached so that it's very visible. It would have to be visible. It would have to be very available to her. So maybe put it in multiple places in the house and in the school, or produce a smaller version with single icons on a little ring and have them somewhere attached to her wheelchair so that she can pull it up and actually show what she wants. Now, this is really important, and it shouldn't be just toy. It should be everything she wants. And, you, as I always say on here, Shannon, it's important to teach one thing at a time. So for me, if it was my child, I would be very interested in teaching my child maybe 50 different things that they could want. So different toys, different types of foods, different activities, different people they would want to spend time with, different places they want to go, all sorts of things. And different activities, even things like, I want to take a bath, I want to go to sleep, whatever, pictures of herself doing those activities. And this could be all pictures. And then they should be available and one at a time taught and used so that it becomes functional. And after that's done, you can obviously, since this is someone who's verbal, you can also then start, once they're useful, once the person starts to use them frequently, then of course you can start to attach vocalization to it and have the individual imitate or mimic the sound. So for instance, toy. But you don't have to require that initially. Initially, you just want them to identify the icon for the object. And so you can do this with anything that is preceded by a negative behavior, a challenging behavior, usually can be replaced with something much easier. Think of all behaviors as communication.
Wonderful. And I appreciated what you were saying. For the longest time, when we were doing therapy, we had a sign that we put on our bathroom mirror that said, and it's a gross oversimplification, but I needed it. I needed a reminder to ignore the bad behavior and reward the good behavior.
Yes.
And it's so much more complicated than that, but that basic thing would remind me, okay, this...
Ignore it. Just ignore it. Yeah, absolutely.
Whenever possible, but making sure that I was rewarding the good behavior. It's funny because my friends would all see that in the bathroom and ask me about it, and then they would start applying it to their lives, and they still call me up and go, guess what happened? And I ignored this. And it doesn't have to just be their child. It can be their child's teacher. It can be their boss, their spouse, their mother-in-law. They'll say, I ignored the bad behavior and I rewarded the good behavior, and guess what happened? And people's behavior changes as a result of that.
Yeah, what becomes very important, I think, is for our parents to learn what we mean when we say ignore, because a lot of times they don't ignore. They think they're ignoring, but they talk about it. They talk to the individual about it. They look at it.
We huff, we puff, we roll eyes.
We do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Ignoring means acting as if it didn't occur.
Right.
So, and that's hard.
It's a tough order,
Yeah.
but very powerful.
Very powerful.
I'm going to move on to the next question. Good morning. I really enjoy your show. Thank you so much. They say, my son is very clever, but has medical attention-seeking behavior. He's 22 years old. When things are going well, life is great. My biggest problem is that when he earns a reward for not calling 911, he will call later that day or night. Arg. Now what? Thanks for your wisdom. I'm running out of ideas. He is clever.
I was trying to figure out what the parent meant with medical attention-seeking behavior.
Yes.
But so basically his behavior is he calls 911.
He's serious about it. And we do, and I have to admit, too, that I laughed when I saw it, too, because our kids are so clever. And I know that for you, this is, probably not a laughing matter when he's called 911 more than once and you're concerned about safety. But you have to admit that our kids are amazing and what lengths they will go to get what they want and how they go about it. They're brilliant. They really are brilliant. And there is a part of it that you have to appreciate the intelligence and the ingenuity.
No, absolutely, I agree. I wish I could help you quickly, but perhaps I can help you if you respond to a couple of things. I don't know what he's getting out of it. I need to know what the reinforcer is. So often what you try to figure out is sort of what is the reinforcer that he's getting, and that helps you identify why he's doing the behavior. So is it because he enjoys talking to the person on the other end? Is it because, what aspect of this? And maybe you can email us and let us know what has happened up till now. In other words, it could be something as simple as he likes the attention, the negative attention he gets from you guys when you find out.
Right.
It could be he likes the sirens if police have actually shown up at your house or fire department has. I don't know what it is. We have to figure out what he gets out of it, and then we have to teach him a more appropriate way to get that. So perhaps you can try to let me know what it is that is enticing to him.
Yeah,
what aspect of it.
That would be really, really helpful. So write in and let us know, and then we'll be able to continue on that question. Next one, kind of medical related. This was one left from last week that you specifically said you wanted to answer. What should I do to let my daughter speak up when she's not feeling well? And we asked for an age, we didn't get one, so we don't know even still. But it's hard for our kids who are on the autism spectrum. I know we even struggle with this with Jem, that to get a bead on when they're not feeling well, for them to connect the dots and say how I'm feeling is not right, and speak up about it. Sometimes it's after they've thrown up that they say, I wasn't feeling good.
There's an easy way to do this. It's harder for you as a parent than it is for the child. But here's what you do. You basically will this is the hard part for you as the parent.
Okay.
You take pictures of them when they're really sick.
Okay.
Okay, so you'll take pictures of them throwing up. You'll take pictures of them with a fever laying in bed with a thing on their head or whatever it is.
Okay.
You take pictures of that, and then that becomes sort of a visual, let's say, icon to cue them for nonverbal kids particularly, that this is, you say, this is how you feel, and they'll start to communicate it by just saying kind of, this is how I feel, and they'll use that as a communication. For verbal kids, obviously it's a little bit easier because you teach them when it's happening to label, just like anyone else, just to label what it is, right? So if a child is throwing up, you want to make sure you teach them the word nausea or vomiting so that they know this is what happens this is nausea. This is, when your tummy hurts, this is what happens. So you talk to them about it. Oh, your tummy hurts. Oh, you're getting sick. It's okay. It'll go away. And then you calm them. And then the next time when it starts it's not as simple as them. As a parent, fortunately, we always identify when there's something wrong with our kids. We can tell the symptoms, the signs. We can tell there's something wrong, but we can't tell exactly what. So as long as we've labeled it before when it's happened, then putting those choices in front of the child will make them become more verbal in terms of labeling it when it actually happens.
Okay. All right, great.
Yeah.
So language as much as possible, but take pictures.
Label it for them when it happens, whether you label it verbally or visually as a picture. It's important to label it.
Okay, and I'm thinking maybe if they're throwing up, if there's two of you there, one person can be taking the pictures while the other one is labeling and soothing.
Yes, yes. And, you know, I mean, I find with my kids, it's funny because they've learned so throughout the years that I will always ask them the same series of questions when they're not feeling well. And so they actually now, my kids have gone to the point where when they are sick or when there's something wrong, they'll tell me all those things. It's almost like a mini checkup, you know.
So
it's
what
like,
are the questions?
Well...
Can you share?
Sure, but I mean, I hurt, right? So it starts with something hurts. So I always will go into what part hurts, like what part of your body is actually hurting.
Okay.
Did something happen to make it hurt? So like, was there a physical incident that occurred to make that hurt? What have you eaten? Have you had regular bowel movements? Are you sleeping? Do you have a temperature? Those are basically the main things that'll give you information about everything else. Do you feel hot or do you feel cold? Do you feel nauseous? And those are that's like 5-6 questions. You'll get everything.
Okay. Interesting. Fascinating. All right. Granpeesheh, I want to go to a question that just came in. Hi, my 5-year-old son lately is constantly talking about a screened-in patio and chair. Every time we sit down at a dining table or go outside, he will say, look at screened patio or look at chair. I try to get him to talk about something else by saying, what else do you see? But he will just say screened-in patio. I don't want to discourage his talking, but I want to shape it into something more appropriate. He used to do this months ago but stopped, but now he's doing it again. He does have a good amount of communication and asks questions consistently. Thank you for your show and advice. He used to say every time we sat for dinner, he would say, we don't have black beans. He has a lot of language and answers, questions, and ask them, but he is getting repetitive lately again. And they said, thanks.
So there's a couple of different things you can do. One is obviously you can write down, or I don't know what his level is in terms of reading, but if he can read, you would write down other things that he would be able to say. For instance, if you're walking into a room, you might write some other thing about that room that he could say. So you're giving him alternatives. If he can't read, then as you enter the room, you would immediately say something that he would echo. So the TV is on, or just some other statement, so that you have other statements preceding what he's saying about the screens. That's one thing you can do, and you can, so that every time you enter, you're giving him other alternatives of things to say. Another thing you can do is actually start asking a lot of questions when he talks about the screens. Our kids tend to not want to answer questions, so asking questions about the screen might ruin the whole thing for him. So if he says what does he say? There's a screen or something in the
she says, what do you see? He says screened-in patio.
Yeah, so you can also just say, like, what color is the screen? How big is the patio? What do you see outside the screen? Like, just bombard him with questions about it. And also, if he's responding to just you saying, what do you see? And that's what initiates this, then that's an easy thing, because you, change your question by saying something else, like, what's in this room? And limit what do you see to another lesson, like limit it to being in a closed room with objects in front of him, so he only hears the SD, the instruction. What do you see in that circumstance? But I think what happens usually with our kids is they will tag on to a particular line, and then that becomes, just as they enter a room, the very first thing, I'm assuming, as he enters the room, the very first thing he does is start saying, like, there's a screen or something, in which case you can start asking him questions about it, and then at the same time you can give him alternative things to begin with.
Yeah. I remember when Jem was this age that we were given assignments about things that we were working on that I could ask him questions to distract him that went with the assignment that we were working on.
Yes.
Like, for instance, if we were working on the color yellow, so that he would perseverate on drains and vacuum cleaners. And if we went in someplace, when he started asking questions, he would ask people if they had a drain or ask them if they had a vacuum cleaner. So before we would cross the threshold, would say, okay, we're going to go in the room. Let's find all the things in a room that are yellow. So it preoccupied him, and we would go in and list all the things that were yellow. It was like getting there beforehand.
Exactly. Or putting his mind on something else beforehand.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, and we found that it was really effective. I need to start doing that with the Minecraft stuff. When he starts monologuing about Minecraft, I need to ask him about other things. Right?
He starts monologuing about Minecraft
or a video game. He'll start telling, and I will let him have 5 facts. I say, tell me 5 facts, and then we're going to move off of this subject, and you're going to introduce the next subject. But it's usually something to do with video games, and then I have to prompt him to do something else.
So I just want to make a point about this with Jan too.
I know I sidetracked the conversation. I apologize.
No, it's okay. It's just that he is too high functioning for you to be telling him at this point we're going to do 5 things.
Okay.
That's too young for him.
All right, so he needs to keep track of that for himself.
Exactly. You can say to him, just let it go one time.
Okay.
And everything he says, just put it down.
Ah.
Okay, and then say, do you notice how many things you said? You're going to start tracking this so that you don't say more than a couple each time, because what is it going to do? It's going to make me lose attention and not be interested.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's, I learn here too, so this is all good. Okay, I want to talk about some adults here for a second. Hello, my adult son is getting ABA for his challenging behavior. And first of all, I got to say congratulations, because a lot of people have not yet put that together, that you can do that there is no age at which you say, oh, well, the ABA boat sailed.
Yes.
Great for our adults. He is doing well during sessions, but still has incidents with me and his dad. He loves to shop at Walmart. We pre-teach before we go in the store of what is expected of him. The other day he was doing really well, so we went into the store to buy a movie, his choice. He was in a great mood, picked out the movie, and then on the way to the register, kicked someone in the store. No clear trigger, I think, ? His dad got him calm, but now how do we go to stores with him again? He has a history of aggressing toward people in stores, but also has had great trips to the store. I'd like to keep taking him to places, but I'm nervous since his mood can change so quickly, and any advice would be wonderful.
Yeah, I just love how genius our kids are with the things they do. They're just so adorable.
Well, and I love how genius the moms are. I love your honesty that you're saying, sometimes he's good and sometimes he's not, but now I'm nervous to ever go, because I think that's what any of us would be feeling.
Absolutely.
That's the truth.
Absolutely.
And that you reached out for help, because that's the single hardest thing there is to do, to own up to it, say, this is what I'm feeling, and I don't know what to do. Right. So congratulations on that.
This is actually an easier thing to deal with than you can imagine. It's just that we get lost because we're doing so many different things, and as I always say, you need to focus on one thing at a time. So what is the behavior that you're trying to change? Very simple. You are trying to get him to not hit anyone, not aggress towards people in the store. So that's your goal. So just write it down, not aggressing towards people in the store. And you're not actually actively teaching that. What you've been doing is you're kind of taking him to the store, doing a bunch of other stuff, and if he aggresses, then you're in trouble, and if he doesn't aggress, you find that to be a good day. Well, you need to actively work on that. So that means you go to the store, you establish for yourself some sort of baseline. So you think to yourself, well, if I take him to the store for 1 minute, he won't aggress. He never aggresses in the first minute. Could be the first 30 seconds. It could be whatever you think is safe. Or maybe go a few times and average out what it is before. How much time is there before he aggresses? Let's assume it's a minute, whatever it is. So that's your baseline, and now you want to grow that to an hour. Okay, so you'll start with just taking him to the store for 1 minute. He didn't aggress, you're done.
And he gets a reward for that.
He gets a reward, and you leave.
Okay.
You do not stay in the store.
Okay.
You go for 2 minutes. You go for 5. You go for 10. You very gradually increase the duration of time that he's in the store. And if you hit a point where he aggresses, then he doesn't get a reward, and you leave, and that was a failure, and depending on his level of functioning, you can make sure he understands that that was a failure, not getting a reward and all that sort of stuff. And then you go back to the previous baseline. So let's say he fails at 15 minutes. So you know that he can cope up to about 14 minutes. And so the next day that you try it, you go for 14 minutes and you get him back on a successful thing again. And you gradually shape this up. Now, as you do this, you will get to a point, and it's a boy, yes. And so I have to tell you, just like typically developing boys, generally speaking, he's probably getting bored after a certain period of time, or impatient, or something is happening where he needs his thing and he needs to get out. It's really that simple. So you have to try to, and it's important, like, he wants a video and you can plan it, but each time you go to the store, that's the single thing you should be working on. Nothing else. No other shopping, okay? It's about him going to get his thing, okay? And once you've mastered this and gotten it to whatever length of time is the average amount of time you functionally need to go to the store, let's assume it's 30 minutes, which would allow you to do other things as well, then you will basically try to also make it easier for him. Give him something to keep him busy. I think that's one thing that works very well is music. If you can give him headphones, he's basically, think about this, for half an hour that you're in the store, he's walking around following you while you do boring things, and then he gets one thing out of it. So, help him by making it a little bit easier, and then of course give him the reinforcer. The key here is to shorten the task, make the task easier for him. That's why you start at baseline, 1 or 2 minutes, whatever's easy for him. And you give him something rewarding or entertaining while he's doing it to give him a higher sense of tolerance. And you reward him when he's behaving well. And if he doesn't behave well, you leave I don't want to say you leave the store right away. You definitely don't give him his reward.
Okay.
You definitely don't give him his reward. Now, the reason I'm saying you shouldn't necessarily leave the store immediately is because he'll learn that hitting gets him to leave the store.
And if he's bored, it might happen more.
Exactly. So essentially, you said that he will hit someone. You kind of need to figure out what is the trigger.
Yeah.
Whether it's boredom, sometimes our kids get frustrated in stores because they have bad lighting, fluorescent lighting. Could be noise level, because in those spaces, some of our kids are hearing too much sound. You really have to figure out what the antecedent and what is the trigger. But in this case, I would also just pay attention to the fact that you need to shape this behavior. You can't just expect him to be good when you go shopping.
Yeah. I think another pair of eyes is often helpful.
Very
I've shared
helpful.
before on the show that we couldn't figure out why Jem was throwing a tantrum in the store, in the same area of the store, and I couldn't figure out what I kept on saying there is no antecedent. And what our therapist was able to come and identify almost immediately was that there was a change in the floor tile, right? And I had not noticed that he was having a problem with floor tiles at Disneyland and other places. I hadn't been able to put it together until someone else looked at it and said, that's what's happening right there. And he sensorily couldn't handle it and would throw a tantrum.
Right.
So having another pair of eyes, because you can't see 360. I love to lie to my child and tell me that I can, but it's not true. And I also want to, our whole topic for this entire week is knowing what the target is and being aware of that because of a conversation that we had last week. And so I just want to bring home what you said about when you go to the store to work on this.
That's all you're doing.
It's not with the hope of getting shopping done at the same time.
It's not a shopping trip.
That's a lesson further along. It's great to take our kids and do real life things, but not when we're targeting a behavior like this.
Right.
So just keep that in mind. That's when you know that you have to get that bottle of Tylenol, that is not the trip you take to work on with this. You do that at 2:00 in the morning or some other time, or have a friend do it. But when you're going to the store to target a behavior that's like this, that's all that's happening.
Right. Because you want to be able to reward the child after their baseline. So, and I have to say that, the example that you give with Jem and the floor tile is so important, because often we wonder, the probably the number one most frequent question for me is, I don't know why it's happening. There is no antecedent. There is no trigger. There's always a trigger. It's just that our kids see things differently, and it would never really occur to us to look at the floor tile, or the light, or the sound. I mean, they perceive the environment very differently, and they're not just going around tantruming or hitting people for the heck of it.
It's just not random. We think that it is, but it isn't.
Right.
And the number of years we've been doing this, I finally get that. There's nothing that's happening behaviorally is random, especially if it's happening more than once.
Yes, absolutely.
Anyway, all right, I'm going to move on to the next question here, which is also about an adult, different circumstances. They said, thank you so much for helping all of us who care for our kids on the spectrum to not feel alone. That's important.
Yeah.
None of us should feel alone. We're all in this together. I didn't think much about employment when my son was younger because there were so many other issues to deal with. He's now 23 years old and has 1 semester to go to finish his BS degree in supervision and management. Well, first of all, we have to celebrate that.
Congratulations.
Woo-hoo.
That's right.
They go on to say he's been working part-time for 4 years now and hopes to become associate manager when the position becomes available. Having said that, he still struggles with social issues, although working has helped him learn how to get along better with others and avoid unnecessary confrontations. His job requires teamwork and dealing with the public, which can be difficult at times. I also would like to mention that my son was never labeled, and at this point, I have made a decision to never disclose to him that he is on the spectrum. It's enough that he knows he needed and continues to need support in certain areas. And they said they sent our love. So, in terms of this, I don't know where the question is about whether he's going to be able to do this job, but I think,
how does he get better at these social skills?
Yeah.
I think, and I think the key to this, I think for you, which might be helpful. I have a lot of other people who also reach out to me whose children are not on the spectrum or adults are not on the spectrum, and they just want some guidance on teaching some basic things like planning and so on. I would suggest that you get on our skills website yourself, skillsforautism.com, and you just get a 1 month membership and go into the executive functioning section, and the social section, and the cognition section. There's so many valuable areas. And you, one by one, you read those things. Some of the early ones are very, very young and won't pertain, but some of the harder concepts that we have in there, for instance, in social settings and so on, there's a lot of stuff about how to interact with others, how to manage confrontations. There's a section called confrontations. So that might be helpful to you. You can do a free testing of this, and if you find stuff on there that's useful to you, then just maintain the membership. Another series of documents that you should read, Tony Attwood, Atwood, is I believe he's a psychologist, and he's from New Zealand, I want to say, or Australia.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which one
I
it
think
is
New
now.
Zealand.
I think it's New Zealand. And he is my favorite person when I read material on Asperger's and coping and teaching ourselves things for Asperger's. I really love his material. So look up some of his books. His books are focused on Asperger's. He talks mainly about individuals with Asperger's and how to help them with these types of things. And what you're describing to me sounds like someone with Asperger's. It's not so much, when you talk about, and I know that obviously it will affect struggling with social issues does affect supervision and management and so on, but, and I wouldn't expect an individual like this to become extremely social, but you certainly can identify, they themselves can certainly identify what is expected of them in supervision and management of other people, and then they can just basically, handle that and encompass those behaviors into their own daily routines. It never really comes naturally to them, but they learn what is expected and they tend to apply those things. And that's the general rule. As long as you can succeed, as long as your behavior doesn't hold you back, and that would apply to your child right here. So in some ways, since you don't want to really, let me throw something else out at you. I wonder if he himself has concluded that he has something going on that makes it hard for him. And I want you to think about that, because I have a lot of adults who come to me and say, I never realized that I have Asperger's. And now that I see it in this child, or the more I hear about it, I realize I have it. And it's quite it's an awakening, and it's an enjoyable, cathartic awakening in some ways, because it's almost like, aha, this is what people will tell me. I'm not dumb. For all these years, I thought I'm dumb, but I'm just, this is how my brain works. And there's others like me. That's awesome, and it's almost like a positive thing. So I don't know. I mean, if he himself struggles with it, you might consider leaving out a couple of Tony Attwood's books so that he could maybe read about it and see if that's something that makes sense to him. And if you don't want to go down that path, obviously, then I suggest you read some more of the literature on Asperger's, and you will find a lot of guidance for how to assist him or help him in life.
I think that's great advice.
We do have
a personal choice.
It is a personal choice, and I would really start looking up some more information about Asperger's, because I don't feel like Asperger's has anything really to do with the spectrum of autism. Personally, I don't feel. I think it's very different. I think it is a subphenotype that needs to be split off, because individuals with Asperger's have a very skewed high intelligence generally, and they're very interested in certain things and not others. And I think they're not only functional. I feel like individuals with Asperger's often teach us a lot.
Yeah.
And I feel like there are a lot of typically developing people who also have issues with, let's say, social behavior, or managing others or supervising others and so on. And I think the same things apply to them. Yeah. So I don't think Asperger's is necessarily something that requires treatment of any type. I think individuals with Asperger's are very functional. I do think that other aspects of their behavior, just like our behavior, might need some tutoring or education, but I don't think it's treatment that they need.
Yeah. I think a lot of times parents think that I'm going to think less of them if they don't tell their kids, because they know that I'm very open with Jem. I want to remind everybody that it's such a personal thing, that between you, how you are and how you run your family and how your kid is, that's a really personal thing. I do like to tell people, though, that if you're afraid of what it's going to be, how much fun we have. We've been watching a show that's called Brain Games. Mm-hmm. You can get it on Netflix.
It's awesome.
It is awesome. And I love sitting and watching it with Jem, because now, having sat in this chair for a couple of years and seen all the research over the last couple of years, they'll introduce a concept.
Oh, it's fabulous.
And they show you the research about it, that this is what our brains do. But I'm able to say to Jem, except autism brains don't work that way, babe. Let's take the test together and let's see the difference between you and I. We covered last week on the show the test that they do with the fake arm, that they put a fake arm and they try to convince you that it's your arm, and most people are confused that there's a fake arm, and eventually they try to they whack it, and people think that their arm has been whacked and sometimes feel pain, except that individuals with autism don't.
Yeah.
And then they showed that experiment with neurotypical people, and I said to Jem, this is fascinating, because we just covered this, that a person with autism doesn't feel this. And then there'll be actual tests that you can take together side by side. We love that. Oh, and he'll go, they couldn't fool me. Yeah. And I go, yeah, but they fooled me, because you've got the autism brain, your brain works different, and they can't fool you. Yeah. And he just thinks that's so cool.
It is cool. It's extremely cool. Something else that I've learned, things we don't generally know, my kids have taught this to me, is that, do you know that you hear different sounds based on your age? Mm-hmm. This is sort of an interesting thing for me, because there's particular frequencies of sound that my kids will play. I mean, you hit a button and it produces sounds, and literally, you hear certain sounds up to the age of 10. You hear other sounds up to about, I think, 20 or something. And so these sounds gradually change as you get older, and it's unbelievable.
So that's why we like the music we like, and then we don't like what they listen to?
You know what? Maybe. That makes sense as well. Maybe. But I mean, if you have a room of people different ages and you play these applications, it's fascinating. If you just raise your hand when you hear the sound and when you don't, it's fascinating to see what sounds we don't hear. It's amazing, actually.
Yes.
And that, when I do these types of experiments with my kids and everybody else in my household, I just find it so interesting because you never would know, because what we go through life the same, right? But think of that and take that and apply it to autism and think of how many different sounds they could be hearing and not hearing, and how that actually will alter their universe completely.
Yeah.
And it's really amazing to me. And that's just one sense. Like the same could be happening with visually.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And I have conversations with Jem about those kinds of things, and it's enjoyable.
Yes.
And it's enjoyable for him. I like for you to know that that's possible. But if that isn't what you choose, please know that I know that our household runs in a different way than everybody else's household. And I leave room for the fact that, I have no way of knowing what's best for you.
Yeah, it's a very personal decision.
It is. And I applaud you making the decision for yourself, always.
Absolutely.
And embrace that. All right, we've got time for maybe a couple more questions. A question about potty training. It's something that we've talked about a lot on the show. Do we want to just refer them to some of the different shows that we've done, or do you want to talk about it briefly?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the question asks, what are some techniques? For
a 4-year-old that's not completely potty trained.
I trained on the Fox and Azrin method, Fox and Azrin potty training technique. You could probably Google that and it'll come up. But you can also go on on IBT, Institute for Behavioral Training website, and look up the module for potty training. There's a training module. It goes into great detail. It tells you exactly how to teach it. 4 is perfect age. Usually that's the age that we're dealing with. And it's a pretty straightforward and easy technique, so I recommend it.
And we've done a lot of videos on it here with Dr. Granpeesheh and other doctors. You can go to our YouTube page and Google. You can even watch on the A Word where they implement that technique.
Great.
So one that came in fairly recently. Hi, my son will make high-pitched noises or grunts loudly when playing, and he will get very animated and disruptive. When I say to him, she says his name, and she says, "My ears hurt, too loud," and she covers her ears. He looks at me and covers his ears and does lower his volume, but soon enough, he'll start again and thank you. Could you help us, please? She goes on to add some more.
This is actually
has very little words.
Yeah, this is a very simple thing. You take him in when he does that. It's really that simple.
Take him in. What do you mean?
Stop him from playing.
Oh, okay.
End his play session.
Okay.
So it's a natural consequence. So if you just end his play session, he'll figure out, oh, she ends my play session the minute I start making these noises, and the noises will go away.
Okay,
it's
great.
Really pretty simple.
All right. I want to, they've written in before about this, but they say, hello, I've already written in about my daughter's issues with needing the same cup, eating the same foods at mealtime, and overall struggles with emotional control over little changes in routine. She has ABA, but that's only for 2 hours a week. What can I be doing with her the rest of the time? The cup issue is the worst since it's a sippy cup and she's 5. How can I get her to drink out of other cups? We have lots to choose from. Also, I think you referred to it as over-selectivity, but I can't find any information on it. Is it called something else? And thank you very much.
Sure. First of all, you should look up stimulus over selectivity.
Okay.
So stimulus over selectivity, and there's a lot of information about it. The cup issue doesn't sound like over selectivity, but what you should do is you should there's a principle called the Premack principle, which is you reinforce a less likely behavior with a higher likelihood behavior. Now let's assume, and it's the same concept as operant conditioning, essentially, where like the behavior that she has is this preferred cup, right? So allow the preferred cup, but make it contingent on one sip out of a non-preferred cup. So let's say, good thing that I have 2 cups here. Let's say that this is the preferred cup right here, and this is the non-preferred cup. And what you do is you put enough in here, that's 1 sip, and then you fill this one, and you will hold this one and say you have to finish that. So she'll take 1 sip out of the non-preferred, and then she can have the preferred, and then you're done. Then you do that a few days, and then you come back and then you put 2 sips in here, and so then now she has to do a little bit more from here, and then she can have this, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, and before you know it, you get to a point where there's so much in here that by the time she's had this, she doesn't want this anymore. She's not thirsty anymore, and you might actually want to make this more delicious than this, so that it just becomes a transitional thing. And now what will happen is she'll transition to this one, and then she'll start preferring this one. So then you should rotate and get her to a point where she has preferred juice or drink in both of these. Once you get to a point where she's good with 2 cups, it'll be much, much easier to rotate to other cups. And by the way, if there's an insistence on things like that, to me, that's more of an important trigger. It's just a sign of some form of anxiety. Hoarding or holding on to one object is more of a obsessive compulsive type behavior, which is usually a sign of some form of anxiety. In other words, people feel safer when they have their own things. And this is the same as a child who carries around a security blanket, a safety blanket, so that's essentially why we become obsessed about one object. It could also be that she finds that object to be the only object that's, let's say, clean or something like that. But let's assume that you essentially make this happen in terms of her broadening her choices, but pay attention to the fact that she might be doing this because it's a safety item. So perhaps give her other safety items that are acceptable. Do we know the age of this child? If it's a young child, safety objects are things like stuffed animals and blankets, things that they can have.
She's
with
5.
5. There you go. Another thing that you could use would be like a bracelet of some type that's a safety object that she can always have with her. Those types of things tend to be good replacements for, obsessive items.
Okay, great.